I'll go on again, I'll start again because I'm on the microphone. I said, it's now 10 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I would welcome members of the public to the meeting of the Planning Committee for further consider the construction of a heat and power plant at Warboys, and to the application for Woodacre Developments Limited located in Whittlesea. You are most welcome, and I hope that you find today's meeting interesting. Please can all members of the public turn off their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. Please note that we are not expecting a fire alarm test today, so if the fire alarm rings, we will need to vacate the building. If this occurs, please follow instructions from officers and not from me, because I'll be well gone. Please also note this meeting is being filmed and streamed to the Council's YouTube site. I'll be breaking for lunch at approximately 1 p.m. for 45 minutes. The time of the lunch break will be dependent on the progress made during the meeting and the natural point on which time to break. It's important that members listen to all the information, representations and debate which takes place concerning an application, and should only vote if they have been present for the whole of the application. I will try to allow time for comfort breaks on occasions when we'll be hearing a number of lengthy applications. However, if you do need to leave the meeting outside these comfort breaks, I would ask you to indicate to me that you wish to have a short pause in the meeting, and I will stop matters at a suitable time for you to leave, and we will resume upon your return. Should we take a short break, for whatever reason, I would ask that members refrain from talking about any of the applications on the agenda or engaging with members of the public in the gallery. Thank you. So, we'll move on now. Apologies and declarations of interest.
Apologies received, Chair, from Councillor Gardner and Councillor Howe substituting, and also Councillor Kindersley and Councillor Batchelor substituting for him. Thank you very much for that.
Now, moving on, members are asked to declare an interest under the Code of Conduct on items on the agenda for today's meeting. Members need only declare a disclosable pecuniary or non-statutory disclosable interest if they are not registered on the register of interests. When declaring interest, members should indicate whether the interest is a disclosable pecuniary or a non-statutory disclosable interest, and explain briefly the nature of the interest and how it relates to the item. Members should inform the monitoring officer of any disclosable pecuniary interest which is not currently registered within 28 days of this meeting. If a member does not declare such an interest now, he or she must remember to declare it before speaking. So, do any members wish to declare interests? Councillor Howell.
Chairman, just very quickly, I have several friends who I associate with in a personal capacity who live in Warboys, although we have never discussed this matter with them.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. So, number 2 is election of Vice Chair for the meeting. In Councillor Gardner's absence, I would like to conduct an election for a Vice Chair for this meeting. Can I take any nominations, please? Councillor Hutton? Have I got a second of that? Councillor Hunt? All those in favour, please? So that's unanimous then. Thank you for that. So it was, thank you. So could Councillor Harford please come to the table, please. Thank you. Sorry?
Probably need to go off from now.
Yes. We'll just leave a couple of minutes for Councillor Hartford to get comfortable before we move on. Welcome, Councillor Hartford. Are you happy for me to continue? Thank you. So minutes from the planning meeting of the November the 1st, 2018. Can I ask members to confirm I can sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of November as an accurate record?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Right, so we'll move on to the first item of business is the reconsideration of the application for the heat and power plant at Warboys landfill site. Firstly, members of the committee will already be aware that I'm proposing a motion suspended usual speaking rights to allow for a full and proper representation from the public. The motion is that I extend speaking rights to all those who have requested to speak against the application, and they will have 3 minutes each. 3 minutes each. Speakers have already been informed that this meeting will not involve a full rehearsing of the entire applications, and any representations at the meeting today should only relate to the 2 matters set out on the officer's report. Other than extending the time allowed for all speakers against the application, offering the same total amount of time available for those in support of the application, all other speaking rights will remain the same, and I will use the same order. That is public bodies first, supporters, objectors, local district and county councillors. Do I have a seconder for that, please? That's Councillor Hudson, and we'll have Councillor Whitehead this time. All those in favour, please, we'll just have a show of hands. That's unanimous. Thank you for that. All public speakers who registered to speak against the application at least 5 working days before the meeting, in accordance with the Council's guidance, and have received acknowledgement from Mr Snowden, will therefore be allowed to speak up to 3 minutes. Before I ask Helen to present her report, members will have noted that they have been sent 4 direct emails in respect of the application. 1 from a member of the public, 2 on behalf of Warboys Landfill Action Group, and 1 from Warboys Parish Council. Although some of the information contained in these representations goes beyond the 2 points we are considering today, I've exercised my discretion as chairman on Tuesday to allow these late representations in order that the matters raised do relate to the points we are considering today are put to before members. All members and applicants' agents were notified of my decision on Tuesday afternoon. Please now, can I confirm all members have read the late representations? Yeah. Oh. Well, sorry, well, we'll have to have a, sorry. Yeah. So I suppose what this leads to say now that we'll have to adjourn for 15 minutes, I suppose, for you to read the... Sorry? Yep. Would you, so... Yep. Right. So, while Councillor Bradman's reading the late representations, members of the public, copies of the late representations have also been made available at the back of the room if you'd like to take sight of these. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Councillor Bragman has returned to her seat, and I'm just going to ask Councillor Bragman that on for record you read that. That's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Yeah, meeting resumed at 10:23. Thank you. So now we'll move on then. Helen, could I ask you now to present your report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The proposed development is described in detail in the report and on the slide, but in summary, there are two related elements. Firstly, a biomass combined heat and power plant for the thermal treatment of up to 48,000 tonnes per year of non-hazardous pre-shredded waste wood and compost oversize in a fluidised bed boiler with recovery of energy, and the energy would be used for the treatment by evaporation of up to 65,000 tonnes per annum of non-hazardous waste water. The wastewater treatment would take place in a process building which would be 9.1 metres or about 30 feet high, with a flue 7.9 metres or about 26 feet above the roof line. So in total, the flue would be 17 metres. I realise it's about 3 months since the Planning Committee last considered this application, so I thought it might be helpful just to recap the context of the proposed development site. The landfill site and waste recycling area are shown outlined in red. The village of Warboys is here. There's obviously the substantial part of the village and a separate section there. To the west of the landfill site is the Wistow and Warboys Wood Site of Special Scientific Interest and Fenside Road. This is a drawing we used in September. It was pulled together to show the full extent of Fenside Road, which is the access to the site. This also shows the proposed development site outlined in red, the materials recycling facility in orange, the landfill site in blue, and an overburden storage area which was used to restore the landfill site in green. Again, the outlying part of Warboys Village is there. The nearest properties to the proposed development site are shown: Woodview, the Old Railway Tavern and Wingate, and in that triangle of land is the caravan site. That's a view of the proposed development site with the materials recycling facility building. That's taken from a landscape bund that's already within the site. This shows the proposed site layout, the existing materials recycling facility building, the proposed wastewater treatment process building, the combustor. The access from Puddock Road would be shared with the access to the materials recycling building and shows better the location of the nearby properties: Woodview, Wingate, the Old Railway Tavern and the piece of land where the caravan site is. The plant would operate 24 hours a day, but the feedstocks would be delivered between 7 AM and 7 PM Mondays to Fridays and between 7 AM and 1 PM on Saturdays. There would be between 32 and 36 HGV movements a day, or between 36 and 38 if none of the waste wood was sourced from the adjacent materials recycling facility. That photograph is taken from the perimeter bund within the site and that's the junction of Fenside Road and Puddock Road, the Old Railway Tavern and the caravan site. A similar perspective but from ground level with the Old Railway Tavern and the caravans in there and Fenside Road. This and the following two photographs have been provided by Mr. Collins from the local community, and we've been asked to have them available. And they do show the materials recycling facility, the proposed development site, the materials recycling facility offices, the capped landfill site, the property Wingate, Woodview, the Old Railway Tavern, caravan site and the proposed access route, which would be Fenside Road. Again, the same features apparent there, with the village of Warboys quite clearly shown. Materials recycling facility and the development site would be here. And again, materials recycling facility, the capped landfill site and the proposed development site there, and the Wingate, Old Railway Tavern, Woodview and the caravans there, with the proposed access road, Fenside Road. As you know, this application was considered by Planning Committee on the 6th of September, when members resolved to grant planning permission subject to the applicant entering into a legal agreement to secure the off-site mitigation and subject to planning conditions. That decision was taken after consideration of the officer's report and after hearing from many concerned local residents and their representatives. Since the 6th of September, the council has received a number of communications. First, a letter from the Minister of Housing, Communities and Local Government advising that the Secretary of State has decided not to call in the application for his own determination. A copy of that letter is Appendix 1 to the report and was provided for members' information only. Second, an email from Professor Brian Lake about the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting on the 6th of September. His email and the Council's reply are included as appendices 2A and 2B to the report, and again for information only. Third, an email from Mr and Mrs Dunkling with a complaint about the Planning Committee's decision on the 6th of September. Their email and the Council's reply are included as appendices 3A and 3B, again for information only. Since then, Mr and Mrs Dunkling have escalated their complaint to the Executive Director and are not happy with his response, so it's now gone to stage 3, which is to the Chief Executive. On the 25th of September, Warboys Parish Council and Warboys Landfill Action Group wrote to the Chief Executive to say that in their opinion there had been a number of errors in the way that the Council considered the planning application. Their letter is Appendix 4A of the report. Warboys Parish Council and Warboys Landfill Action Group are considering applying for judicial review of the decision and invited the Council to itself review the way in which the decision was reached. The Council's response was provided by LGSS Law Limited and is Appendix B to the report. It concludes by saying that while there is no foundation to the challenge, there are two matters which officers wish to bring back before the committee so that members are fully aware of the relevant issues. Those matters are, and as set out in the report, the potential noise experienced by the occupants of the caravan site situated at the western end of Fenside Road, and the effects of water vapour released from the proposed wastewater treatment plant chimney on local atmospheric conditions. Both those matters were raised at the Planning Committee meeting on the 6th of September, but clarification has been sought from the relevant technical specialists. In the case of the noise impact on the caravan site, the Environmental Protection Officer from Huntingdonshire District Council, who has been advising us, Aaron Morley, is here to assist members on this matter. In summary, his advice is that he was satisfied that the applicant had considered the 3 residential properties closest to the development site and that dwellings further away would benefit from attenuation due to the greater distance. In the case of water vapour, the Environment Agency has confirmed that this would be considered as part of the environmental permit application. Permitting guidance refers to the need to consider visible plumes in the risk assessment. Officers remain of the opinion that the advice in paragraph 183 of the National Planning Policy Framework should be heeded and that the potential impact of a water vapour plume would appropriately be assessed by the Environment Agency as part of the permitting process. The final part of the report sets out the officer's review of the planning balance applied to the waste hierarchy. They conclude that in the light of the experts' advice received in respect of noise and water vapour, it has not changed and the proposed development will contribute towards sustainable waste management. The experts' advice has reassured officers that the presence of the caravans would not have affected our recommendation in respect of noise or air quality, and that the plume of water vapour would be assessed by the Environment Agency. In officers' opinion, nothing has changed in the planning balance, and it's therefore recommended that members uphold the decision of the 6th of September 2018 and that planning permission be granted subject to the conditions set out in the officer report of the 6th of September and the completion of a Section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chairman. That's all I have to say.
So members, do you have any questions, points or clarification regarding the presentation from Helen? But please do remember we are not currently debating the application. So I suppose any questions for the officer, Helen?
Yes, I have. Thank you very much, Chairman. In conversation with officers, I understand that the noise assessment that the EHO carried out on the nearest dwellings was carried out actually in the open in their gardens, or included an assessment of noise actually in the gardens. I wonder if I might ask for the EHO to confirm whether or not that is correct.
Yeah, if I may start first. In the conversations with the environmental health officer, we were discussing what the applicants had put forward in terms of the noise assessment and whether what had been carried out was sufficient. As part of that, the conversations and things that were raised at committee was that the insulation of a caravan is not as good as a house, and that therefore people that are living in the house would therefore have more protection. From the conversation, however, I had with the EHO, what he clarified to me was actually when he is assessing and when he's looking at those reports, he's actually looking at the use of the garden as opposed to within someone's house. But I will now ask for the EHO to confirm that, because that did in a way sound like the EHO had gone out and measured it, and that wasn't quite what had been said in the conversation. So I'll just clarify that if I may.
Okay, you can hear me now. Yeah, the British standard for 142 assessment that the consultant carried out on behalf of the applicant is all about assessing that the sound in a free field environment, so it is in the garden. It doesn't bear any resemblance to any sound that can be heard inside any particular property. So that would vary considerably depending on whether it's brick or, of course, if it's a caravan. So it's all to do with assessing whether the occupants are still going to enjoy their garden outside.
Councillor Whitehead, you indicated you want to speak.
It's a follow-up to that. Is it the caravan site? Are they permanent residency caravans, i.e. people can live there for 10 months out of the 12 months of the year? Or are they, temporary occupation, weeks, holidays, and that?
Yes, I did have a look at the planning permission for the site, and it's for temporary touring caravans.
I think you've probably just picked up on the point there, Councillor Whitehead, that there's not permission for people to live there permanently. But I think it was raised at the last meeting that Huntingdonshire District Council have, because of the use that I think that is associated with the A14, their decision is not to enforce against that use, but they still don't have permission for permanent use. So.
Councillor Bradman.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask, has the caravan site been developed more since our site visit in September time? Because the overhead photograph that we were shown showed a site which appeared to be tarmacked. Now, at the time of our visit, it wasn't easy to see because I was looking through the hedge, but I was under the impression the site was still a semi-grassed field. Could anybody clarify that? In other words, has it increased in its usage?
We're not aware of any increased usage.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just keen to find out the status of this caravan site. So as I understand it, and please tell me if I'm wrong, it's a temporary touring car site, but because there's work going on the A14 and accommodation is very scarce in the area, the Huntingdonshire District Council have sort of turned a blind eye to this situation. And I assume, therefore, then they would start to enforce the temporary nature of the site after 2020. Is that my understanding correct?
I hope so.
I think it's difficult to comment on behalf of another council, but I think when they're looking at it, they'd be looking at the harm, and they'd also be looking at how long the occupants need to be there. So on the basis that the project, it runs on time and continues to run on time, then I'm assuming that they are looking that those occupants would have moved out once the A14 is done. But as I say, I can't speak on behalf of Huntingdonshire District Council.
Okay, so understanding is not incorrect. Thank you.
So, anybody else? I can't see it. Nobody else? No. So, no. No, so no. No, we can't. We can't. Councillor Rogers, I'm afraid we can't allow you to speak at this particular time. I think we'll do it when she speaks, I think, and then we'll obviously know from the horse's mouth, so to speak, won't we? Thank you. Councillor Bradman.
I had a question for the Aaron. Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify whether the forgive me if this is not the right time to ask this question, but in our pack we had an email from Olu Adetokunbo and relating an email from Ian Smith, who was the Chemical Contaminants and Residue Food Policy Officer. And I just wanted to clarify, in that email, I will read it out. It says, the Food Standards Agency has considered the application in terms of estimated deposition rates from air emissions on surrounding farmland. And then it goes on, as long as the estimated deposition rates can be verified by monitoring, the impact on surrounding farmland should be negligible. Now, the two halves of that sentence don't seem to match up. And I'm just wondering, could Aaron perhaps advise us?
Sorry. Councillor, apologies for interrupting. As you're aware, we're considering noise impact on caravans and the effect of water vapour. I'm concerned that your question goes beyond that. You were talking about air quality. If it's water vapour, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify.
If it's water vapour, Councillor Bradman, and it's aligned to that, yeah, I'm happy with that to go ahead, provided it's just water vapour. Thank you. I'd like to answer that, if you can, or able.
I will struggle to answer the question, I'm sorry, because my colleague deals with air quality, and she's passed me her comments on it's basically what you've seen in the pack. And the Environment Agency deal with, traditionally they're very good at dealing with emissions from large factories. So I will have to leave that sort of answer to the Environment Agency as the experts for this type of process, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I suppose nobody's indicating that they want to ask any officers any other questions, or Aaron any other questions. So thank you very much for that.
And I'll hold this down, is that
And
okay?
we operate a traffic light system, and obviously I will be pretty strict on time, to be honest, because we have got a lot of speakers and we do need to move on with the business today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for affording objectors another opportunity to address you, to highlight our fears over this application and the implications for Warboys residents and the local environment. We understand that our comments are limited to the two matters referred back to you for consideration, and we hope that the further consideration of these matters might persuade you to change your minds. Having said that, it's unfortunate that your own rules prevent you from coming to any other conclusion. Your officers, and we've heard it just now, are recommending you to affirm the decision that you took on the 6th of September to approve this application. As that decision was taken within the last 6 months, you are precluded from reaching any other conclusion by the County Council's rules of procedure for committee and subcommittee meetings. Rule 17.1 states, a motion or amendment to rescind a decision made at a meeting of the committee or subcommittee within the past 6 months cannot be moved unless a notice of motion is signed by at least half of the relevant committee or subcommittee. I'm not aware that this requisite notice of motion has been signed, and thus you are effectively unable to reconsider your decision. To do so would be a breach of your own rules of procedure, and your discretion has effectively been fettered. It's difficult, therefore, to envisage how you can consider the matters that we're going to draw to your attention today. As objectors, we're limited by the time allotted to speak to you this morning and cannot reiterate concerns raised at the meeting in September. I hope, therefore, that you've had the opportunity to read the email from the Parish Council, which you've received a few days ago and was referred to earlier. The letter urges you to have regard to the impact, particularly the cumulative impact of the proposed development on the environment and the community locally. This should not be left to the Environment Agency, who will only have regard to compliance with relevant legislative requirements. The effects of this development on the local environment is your responsibility as the planning authority under the National Planning Policy Framework, the National Planning Policy for Waste, and case law. Other speakers will address you on the potential impact of the proposal on the local atmospheric conditions and the presence of the caravan site, currently occupied by 30 caravans. This was overlooked in discussion in September, despite having been drawn to your attention by objectors. To avoid repetition, I will not dwell on these matters, but urge you to find a way in which you can circumvent your own rules of procedure so you can consider this application, and having done so, have regard to the cumulative effects of this application with other industrial processes at Warboys landfill site, which includes the landfill itself, associated gas flaring and leachate extraction, and the materials recycling facilities. I would urge you to refuse this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Withams. So, any members, any questions for Dr. Withams, please? Sorry?
We need a legal statement. Is this the point on the Constitution? Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And all the members. Okay, just to clarify, we are not aware as planning officers that members cannot make a different decision today. So we are going to check the Constitution to make sure that that is correct, because I certainly have nothing to say that they can't make a different decision, but we will just clarify that. But as our legal representative has said, she can't do that straight away. So unless members have any other questions as a result of that, we're going to recommend that we carry on going through the speakers and then come back on that point, if that's okay, to make sure that we're factual. Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. We want to make sure that that's right and that's covered before the end of the meeting.
Yes, so I absolutely endorse that recommendation that we carry on. So with that then, so I'll just reiterate that nobody's got any more questions for Dr. Withams, have they? No, no. Thank you very much for that. Would you like to make your presentation to the committee, please? Thank you.
Good morning. Paul McLaughlin, Project Manager at Sycamore Planning. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and a Chartered Waste Manager. When we last met here on Thursday the 6th of September, the Planning Committee resolved to grant planning permission subject to the signing of the Section 106 agreement. The application that we were debating on Thursday the 6th of December was an application that received no technical objections from any of the statutory consultees. Moving on 3 months, we're sat here today to debate another 2 points for which we have received no technical objections from any statutory consultees. I can confirm that the Section 106 agreement has been drafted and is ready to be signed by all parties. I urge the committee to uphold the decision they made on Thursday the 6th of September. Nothing has changed, as the planning officer has pointed out. The recommendation for grant planning permission still remains. A lot will be made today around the role of the Environment Agency, and I think this has been taken slightly out of context. It's important to note that the Environment Agency were consulted right throughout the entire process of this planning application, and they too offered no objection to this planning application. Thank you.
So, any members got any questions for the applicant or the agent, please? Councillor Hartford.
Thank you very much. I know it is in our papers, but I would like you please to confirm that when you took pre-application advice from the Environment Agency, that you had confirmation from them that the matter of the water vapour would be assessed as part of the permit application.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
So, no more questions. I can't see anybody with their hands up. So, yeah, you'd like to carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Neil Foxall. I work at Cormert Limited. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant. I'd just like to reiterate a few points made by the planning officers, in particular on the noise. And I know that we've been sent through some of the letters and petitions that have been sent through to yourselves. In regard to cumulative noise, again, this is something that perhaps we need to clarify. There has been a cumulative noise assessment undertaken as part of the planning application, and this assessment has been looked at by the District Council's EHO. This cumulative noise took into account all the current operations at the Warboys site, together with the proposed biomass and wastewater treatment plan that we're discussing today. As a result of that assessment, there has been no statutory objections from either the EHO or the Environment Agency. I'd also like to point out in relation to the caravan site that there are actually properties closer than the caravan site which have been assessed in free field conditions, and therefore there cannot be, and this is confirmed by the District Council's EHO, there cannot be any impact on the caravans as there are closer properties which meet the requirements set out within the BS standards. So therefore, in terms of noise, the applicant cannot see how a different conclusion can be reached by the committee on this point. In relation to the water vapour, as it's been clarified by the applicant, we are obliged as part of the permit to consider any water vapour issues. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Any questions for Mr. Foxall, please? I can't see any hands raised. Oh, Councillor Hunt.
Yes, and you're talking about water vapour. Are we talking about exactly the same thing that comes out of a kettle in a kitchen? Or am I right in thinking when you say water vapour, you're talking about steam?
To be honest, I'm not quite sure what the issue is around water vapour because since September, no technical information has actually been submitted which elaborates on the cause for concern.
Well, thank you.
So, any other questions? Councillor Howell?
Then just clarify one thing for me. This water vapour, it only contains water and no other chemicals whatsoever. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
It will contain trace chemicals, but they have been assessed as part of the air quality assessment, which has been submitted with the planning application. So it will be water vapour with trace chemicals within that vapour, just like the emissions leaving your car exhaust.
So the type of vapour that's coming out will be approximately the same as what's coming out of the car, a modern-day car exhaust. Is that what you're saying?
No, I can't say that the emission levels are the same, but what I'm saying is that it's similar in nature to what is leaving your car exhaust in terms of it's the same as what's leaving your gas boiler at home, water vapour. There will be, in your vapour, there will be trace chemicals within that vapour. It's not just pure H2O.
With that then, no more questions then. Well, thank you for that, gentlemen. Thank you. Now we'll move on to Mr. Guy McCallan, please. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm reading on behalf of Simon Collins. The supporting evidence is in his email to the committee. The occupants of the 30 caravans were overlooked in the report. Their proximity to the site and Fenside Road will result in them and other residents being disturbed by noise, odour and poor air quality on a continuous basis from the 24/7 operation of the plant. Granting permission would be in contravention of policy CS32, traffic and highways, of the development control policies of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Minerals and Waste Development Plan. The proposed evaporator chimney is 17 metres high, but 13 metres below the escarpment. Monkswood wind speed data used by the applicant is not representative of the wind speeds at the proposed site, where the wind speed will be lower and will not disperse the emissions. This will be made worse by the topology of the proposed site and will cause the emissions and water vapour to be caught in an eddy. The proposed site will be using an untested leachate evaporation to air process, the effect of which is unknown. Guidance for treatment of landfill leachate produced by the Environment Agency makes no reference to the process proposed for the Warboys site. How can the Environment Agency adequately police emissions when there is no precedent data? The Airshed state on the cover of their air quality impact assessment, prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. This quote is used to suggest correctly that the impacts and emissions of an untried process are by definition unknown and unpredictable. The same report states there is insufficient operational experience of the wastewater treatment plant to determine if the odour from the evaporation process is highly offensive or moderately offensive. Granting permission would impact both the landscape character and surrounding uses and would give rise to an unacceptable impact in contravention of policy CS33, protection and landscape character, and CS34, protection surrounding uses of the development control policies of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Minerals and Waste Development Plan. His third point relates to the role the committee were led to believe the Environment Agency has in the planning process. A number of concerns were raised on the 6th of September. We in the committee were told such items fall under the remit of the EA and not planning and therefore could not be considered. Correspondence with Emma Smith of the Environment Agency shows this not to be the case and states such matters are issues to be considered by the committee. To reinforce the point, the cases of Harrison and Hopkins confirm that the issues we raised fall under the committee's remit and or that of individual planning committee members to make their own decisions. If a committee member considers the development will have an adverse effect, then this becomes a material consideration in the planning decision.
Right, could you just finish off the sentence, because you've had a lot more than the 3 minutes, but
The case law is clear. The local authority can take into account these matters rather than leaving them to be dealt with by the permitting process. Thank you.
Members, any questions? No. Thank you very much for that. So now could we have Mrs. Katie McCallan, please?
Good morning. I want to comment on the noise aspect of this application and the impact this will have on the caravan site and the wider neighbourhood. I live 1 kilometre away from the current site and I can clearly hear many of the activities that take place there in my house and in my garden. For anyone living any nearer to the location, it will be impossible to maintain a normal, healthy lifestyle, particularly with the proposal of a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week operation. The only reason that the noise level is in any way tolerable for me is that the working of the site are currently limited and the duration of the intense noise is short. The residents, by the way, of the scrapyard next to the current site have still been ignored in this proposal and they also need to be taken into consideration. They live in caravans next to the big barn. Noise from the additional lorries passing the caravans en route to the site will also cause further negative impact on the lives of those nearby. The impact on the mental health of the residents enduring such noise cannot be underestimated, and therefore I call on you to provide this protection for them. It was stated in the last planning meeting that the number of vehicles using a single-track road to the site would be reducing, but that is clearly impossible. The numbers will be vastly increased by the opening of a second business. The size of the vehicles will be larger than currently used, and therefore so will be the noise of the vehicles. Due to the nature of the road, which is too narrow for 2 lorries to pass, HGVs will have to wait until the road is clear, leading to air brakes being let off by the caravans, stationary vehicles ticking over, and potentially vehicles reversing with warning beacons being activated. The combined effect of scaling up the Woodford site will only add to this burden and should be jointly considered. It was stated in a public meeting that there is a plan to double the Woodford's business, and this will lead to further noise from the site and from the vehicles. If this proposal goes ahead, the site owner will be asked to join the proposed group action to consider legal action for blight due to the massive negative financial impact on houses and businesses in the area. The Environment Agency has no jurisdiction for any activities outside the site, so all of the vehicle movements, the related noises and the pollution are beyond their control. If planners are serious about protecting the residents and the environment from the harm of noise and visual impact, then a bund should be built around the entire site and should be planted with mature evergreen trees that would have an effect from today, not in 15 years as the proposal currently states. Finally, I'm disappointed that this process has effectively gagged my ability to correct the misleading statements from the last planning meeting, and these statements remained unchallenged. In summary, you have the power and the ability to refuse permission for this development. Many thanks.
Thank you for that. Any questions at all? Councillor Howell.
I have a question, not to the lady behind, but from what the lady has just said, so if you don't mind. But can I just clarify for once and for all with regards to this caravan site? So we know that it's a temporary, it's a site for people who should only be there temporary, but at the moment there are people living there full-time who work on the A14. I've got all that right. So this is a legal licensed site, I take it? Yes, it is. I'm having nods across the way. I'm assuming I'm looking for the officers. Is this a legal licensed site? I mean, by HDC?
I think Aaron should answer that possibly.
I don't actually know if it's licensed, but it's certainly got planning permission for temporary caravans.
Okay. All right. Okay. So it's touring caravans. So somebody would turn up here for a week and then go on elsewhere. Is that what this site is for? Or is it a caravan storage? Well, what type of site is it? Can somebody give me an idea of the type of site it is, please?
Area work site, isn't it?
Okay. I think where the confusion is coming in is what it has permission to do and may or may not have a licence to do is different to what is actually happening on the site at the moment. So the site has a permission as far as HDC have informed us that it's for a touring site, so you'd bring your caravan on, stay there for a period of time and then move off. But in reality what is happening at that site is the caravans are remaining while the workers of the A14 are living there.
Okay, and Chairman, with your indulgence, okay, I got that bit, but what happened before the A14 workers and what's going to happen after the A14 workers are on the site? That's the bit I'm trying to really get down to.
And that might be a question that, if you remember, we've got a question that's going to go over to the district councillor to ask later on. So if we can hold it until that point, I've got it all minuted down, okay. We can probably then pick it up and expand on it from that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
So you're happy with that, Councillor Howell?
But wait.
Okay. Councillor Hartford.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just want to clarify, if I may, with Mr. Morley, the noise assessment that's been done, I suppose I've assumed was done on the operation of whatever machinery there is involved in this at this site. But the speaker has just talked about also the noise nuisance from transport I just want either Mr. Morley to confirm that that has been assessed. I've looked in the last committee papers and I can't see anything that answers the question. Or maybe officers want to tell me that because there is no increase in the volume, that it isn't relevant even for us to consider that.
Yeah, the acoustic assessment considers the existing sound coming from the site, where it's landfill and a waste recycling facility. So obviously there's noise coming from there at the moment. I wasn't happy with the first report. I got them to go back and do it again because they came out with some background levels which were a bit too high. There's a lot of time when the background levels were quite low, and that's the most interesting background that I felt we should use to compare with the proposed sound levels. Of course, they've done some modelling and decided the most accurate proposed sound levels, and they're about 5 or 6 decibels above the background. And what we're suggesting in any condition, that it should only be 5 dB decibels above background. So there will be a slight difference, but we call that background creep, which I don't really like personally, but that's a reasonable thing to accept. Sorry.
Does that answer your question?
I think yeah.
You're happy, are you?
No.
In terms of the traffic, as in the September report, it was set out that the combined HGV movements for the landfill site and the materials recycling facility when they were operating together would be 26 per hour at the permitted levels. For the materials recycling facility and the current proposal, it would be 20 per hour. So the current proposal wouldn't result in a higher level of traffic than has previously been permitted.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back briefly to the caravan site again. I understand it's a touring caravan, so you pull in, stay a couple of nights, have a look around, and off you go. The permanent use of the site is a Huntingdon District Council enforcement issue, not ours. But I'd like to pick up something the lady said, please, because you said somebody's living in the 2 caravans near the barn. Are they there permanently? Well, they shouldn't be living there permanently if it's a touring caravan. In a caravan. They're living in caravans on a site that isn't for permanent living on.
Can we just allow Helen to just clarify the situation, please?
They use the access. They have been written to. There is an address point that is flagged up, and we wrote to them and invited them to comment. And as far as I know, haven't received any comments.
They've never been on any of your details, and we're still not considering them now. They're not on any of the reports. They haven't been detailed.
Can I just ask, Chair, please? Can I just thank you? Where exactly do these people live on the picture?
I think we might need to move this picture back. I think it's.
So then, so they're not on the caravan park?
No. No, it's not. No.
That's fine. That's fine. That's clear. I just thought from the lady it was on the caravan park itself, but they obviously. I assume they have permission to dwell there. Though. They don't have permission to dwell there. So am I.
So, Councillor Hudson, has that answered your...
Yes, it has, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradman.
That was, in fact, the point I was going to make, that I understood from the speaker that we were talking about people living actually on very close to or on the site in caravans separate to the caravan site that looks like a D shape. But the officer has explained that they've been written to and they have not responded. So in that situation, we are unable to do anything.
And if I could just add, Chairman, that any noise condition would apply to their premises as a residential property as well. So they would have to, the proposed development, if it went ahead, would have to meet the same noise limits at that property as the ones that we've previously referred to.
One further point on that, is it your estimation that those caravans would be closer to the site of the works than the previously assessed closest houses?
That's distorted, isn't it? So we need to look at an actual flat plan. Just looking on Google Earth, it looks as if they would be, but can I speak? I know this.
No, not until your turn. Thank you.
Chairman, with your permission, and while that's happening, I'd just like to ask a very brief question. Could somebody tell me how long the caravan site has been there, please? Approximately would be fine.
That's a question for Hunts.
Could somebody just shout across how long approximately it's been
actually, if we could flip back to one of the earliest slides, please. Yeah, okay. Whoa. That's one. Yeah, it's actually marked there, Old Station Yard. It's that property here.
Councillor Brabham, yeah.
Thank you. When we were on the site visit, we asked about those properties because as we walked down the access road, there is a post box and a label that refers to the site. And so we asked about that, and we were told at the time they had been written to. So even in September, we knew they had been written to, and we knew that no response had been received. So they have been taken into account in the sense that they have been contacted, and my understanding is that the proper processes have been followed with regard to those caravans.
Councillor Hunt.
Yes, Chair, I think quite a significant thing is quite the site is for touring caravans. Physically, what is on site? Are they touring caravans that can be towed behind a vehicle and could leave within an hour or two, or are they mobile homes?
Councillor, as you've been advised, the current permission is for touring caravans. Therefore, even if there are mobile homes on there at the moment, that would be in breach of the planning permission. It's accepted that at the moment it appears that the District Council are tolerating that. However, they would be entitled to take enforcement action, either if there are touring-style caravans that are on there for longer than what I assume the licence permits, or if they are mobile caravans and they're there permanently. So I would just like to stress again that the permission for that site is simply for touring caravans, notwithstanding what it's being used for.
That's helpful, Chair, and now we're talking about the two caravans that are nearer to the plant. Are they touring caravans or are they mobile homes? And are they there legally, or I know someone said they pay council tax, but I'd still like some clarifications whether they are legally, if they are mobile homes, are they legally there?
I don't think we can answer that in this committee, can we, Councillor Hunt? Because we haven't got the relevant documents to either do it or say not or yes, have we really? It's not in our jurisdiction to, on this particular occasion, to do.
Asking for jurisdiction, Chair.
Well,
I was just asking for clarification.
Well, we don't have the information, do we? That's probably perhaps an easier thing. So all finished with that. So we'll move on then.
Chairman, just a quick.
Sorry,
could somebody tell me, please, how long that caravan park has been there? An approximate will be fine. Are we talking 6 months, 6 years? What are we talking?
Are we talking about the touring caravan site?
I mean, has it just been since the A14 has been built, or are we talking considerably longer? Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you for that, anyway. So we'll move on now to Mrs. Leslie Dunkling, please.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make some points on the effect of this proposed plan on the caravans adjacent to the site and other nearby properties, including mine. I am grateful because you have given incorrect information and that is leading to flawed decision making. From the documents I have seen, the measurements from the proposed plant are wrong and put the caravans much further away from the plant than really are. There is also the case in relation to my property. You have been told that the plant is 170 metres away from my property, which in fact is less than 100 metres away. So it follows there are no grounds for believing measurements in relation to the caravans. I would like to ask you to ask for the measurements to be done again by an independent person. The greatest obvious effect on those who live in the caravan is noise. Judging from the information given to me, you also have been given misleading information on the current situation and what we know from our property, which is similar distance away from the site of the proposed plant as my property. Whenever measurements of noise have been taken, the current plant has been warned in advance and it becomes much quieter for the period and the noise is being measured. The residents in the caravan will be disturbed by increased lorry traffic as well as noise from the plant itself. I have written to the Environment Agency asking them for their estimate of noise and pollution levels from the new plant. They have not replied because they simply do not know, because this is a new departure which is more than 3,000 people in Warboys have signed petitions asking the County Council to put this plant somewhere else, away from nearby properties. We feel that you are determined to bulldoze this proposal through, and the actions based on inaccurate information is unfair, irresponsible, bearing in mind no one knows the impact this plant will have. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, any questions for Mrs. Dunkling? Councillor Batchelor.
Thank you. It's more for the officers, say, rather than the speaker. It's just going back to the measurements issue. Just like a bit of clarity or reassurance, anyway, that we and consultees have used correct measurements when measuring distances.
Thank you. We did touch on this at the last meeting, and if I draw people's attention to paragraph 3.4 of the September report, it does say that Woodview, which I believe is Mrs. Dunkling's house, is 30 metres from the site access and 110 metres from the proposed waste management area. I think, as we said at the last meeting, the reports that are submitted in an application are for different purposes. So the person who's modelling emissions from, say, the combustor chimney will probably take that as their distance, and it varies obviously if you're going to the edge of the garden or whether you're going to somebody's house. But we made quite clear in our report that we were quite specific as to where we were measuring to and from. So I think members did have that information available in September.
Any other questions? No. Thank you very much for that. Mrs. Dunkling, please. Well, you right. That's fine then. So, yeah, I'm sorry that bit's on here. So we'll move on to Mr. Roy Reeves, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Members. Other speakers this morning will address you on the potential impact of the proposal on local atmospheric conditions, although we seem to have concentrated mostly on caravans so far. And I'm going to talk about the presence of the nearby caravan site as well. It was overlooked in assessing the effects of this proposal on the local community at your last meeting, which is obviously why it's here before you again this morning. And if you look in your packet Appendix 4BA, the Environmental Health Officer comments that the caravan site is slightly further away from the proposed plant than the three closest houses, and that any dwelling at a greater distance would benefit from distance attenuation. If you look at the plan contained in the paper from the EHO, you'll see that the caravan site is midway between the dwellings marked R2 and R3, so it's therefore equidistant from the site, not further away. Moreover, the EHO refers to these as dwellings. They are caravans, and they will have poor sound insulation qualities in comparison to dwellings. External noise will be more easily heard by occupants as opposed to those living in traditional houses. No attempt was made by the noise consultants employed by the applicants to assess the noise impact on the occupants of caravans as opposed to traditional dwellings, and this hasn't been challenged by your officers or the EHO. And the EHO also mistakenly writes that the caravans are temporary and are unlikely to be there by the time the plant has been developed. This land has had the benefit of planning permission for many years, probably approaching 20 years, as a touring caravan site, a fact which the applicants, their consultants and your officers failed to identify. With the landfill operations nearby and the adverse publicity that this attracted for many years, it's hardly surprising that a touring caravan site wasn't opened. But there would have been a reasonable expectation on the part of the owner that this would have been possible once the landfill site was closed for tipping, as has happened in recent months. In the interim, the landowner applied for planning permission for the site to be used all year round by A14 workers. This application has yet to be determined by Huntingdonshire Council, but the site is occupied by 30 caravans currently. The District Council are aware of this, but have chosen not to take enforcement action, as you've heard this morning, they are tolerating the current situation. You've heard no evidence as to how long the caravans may be on the site or how soon the plants may be operational if you grant permission. If the application for occupation by A14 workers is ultimately refused, the owner still has a valid planning permission for the site to be used for touring caravans with a warden on site, and the planning permission is for any 2 weeks in a 4-week period by an individual caravan. But there is also the warden as well, who will be there throughout the year. It's therefore impossible to speculate, as the EHO has done, that the site will not be occupied by caravans if this application is approved and the plant's built. If there are complaints about noise, there are already complaints about noise and odours from the operations at the landfill site that your own enforcement team have concluded are a breach of condition. You are required by national planning policies to have regard to the cumulative effects of any development, and as you'll have seen from the paper from the Parish Council, there are already complaints that are a breach of condition at the moment. If you approve this application, it will exacerbate noise and odour emissions from the various industrial processes of the landfill site for which you've granted planning permission, and make life intolerable for the occupants of the caravan site and the 3 nearby houses.
So, any questions for Mr. Reeve?
Just very quickly, Chairman, did I hear correctly there's a warden living on that site? Is that warden living there permanently? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, Professor Brian Lake, please. Sorry for that, Councillor Bramwell, I didn't see your hand. I do apologise.
Thank you. I would just like to ask, I don't know how old Bing map imagery is and Google map imagery is, but in my experience, they're usually around about 2012. And on neither of those mapping systems are there any caravans on that field. So can we just clarify whether this site, I'm not disputing its legality, I just want to know, my understanding is this site is likely to have been instigated since 2013 or something like that? Is that right?
So, Professor Lake, now then, please. A minute late, but thank you very much.
Councillors, I'd like to talk to you about the phenomenon of atmospheric inversion. Put the next one, please. What it is and how, with the evaporator, it will affect the people living by the site. In late autumn, winter and early spring, when the sun shines, warming the soil, and then the clear skies at night allow that heat to go up. And that warm air rises to meet a colder upper layer, preventing its escape. This is the inversion layer. Can you turn the next one, please? The air beneath it is damp, causing fog, mist, and in the very cold weather, very icy roads. This happens several times per month and is the normal feature of the fen weather around the site. The next picture shows how the thermal inversion layer is happening over Salt Lake City, with the dense smog over it, rather like the London smogs of the 1950s. Next one, please. This shows an evaporator working in North Carolina with its steam plume. Now, can you imagine this plume trapped under the thermal inversion layer? When you boil a kettle, you can see how much steam is produced. Then imagine 7,000 kettles boiling at the same time 24 hours a day. The proposed plant will churn out 11 million litres of steam per hour, 24 hours per day. With inversion, this steam will be trapped. It will be like living in a saturated cloud, which will also contain enhanced pollutant levels and carbon dioxide from the CHP, which will emit 250,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide per day. This will be in addition to the emissions from the gas engine working 24 hours a day on the MRF, which was not considered important in the air quality assessment. No significant potential for cumulative impact, they said. However, the cumulative effects of the evaporator, CHP and gas engine on the inversion will make living conditions for the local inhabitants on the fen and those in the caravans less than desirable. Not even to mention the deposition of pollutants on the soil and crops that will ensue. The next picture shows a scene on the fen, taken from a house within a short distance of the site, showing normal inversion. It will be much worse when the evaporator, CHP and gas engine are working. Just remember the words of David Attenborough: if we don't reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we and the planet are doomed. This application must be rejected.
Thank you very much for that interesting. So, any questions? Councillor Howell, thank you.
Could you expand, please, on your air quality is less than desirable? Because I was told earlier on when I asked about the air quality, it is the same as coming out of a gas boiler in the house. How much more of it is that?
We don't know that at the moment, but they have models, and modelling is somewhat suspicious anyway, on certain pollutants. And the man said, actually, there will be chemicals in this plume of steam, without specifying which ones they would be. The gas engine emits quite a lot of volatile organic compounds. There's a limit of 1,500 milligrams per cubic metre, and it is at the moment at about 1,200 milligrams per cubic metre of volatile organic compounds, plus nitrogen dioxide as well. So that will be all in with this steam plume under the inversion layer.
Chairman, so we've got a conflict here. So I've been told one thing by one person and something else by another. So I would like somebody independently to tell me now if this particular steam and the chemicals in it, which are going to possibly fall on the caravan site, of whatever description it is safe. That's what I need to know. Who do I ask?
When it comes, I will ask, obviously, from a planning and land use perspective, whether the EHO has anything to add. But when you're talking about the pollutants and you're talking about the environment and the impact and the safety of it, they will all be matters for the Environment Agency, and they'll all be matters covered by the permit. Now, I do realise that there seems to be a confusion about whether we're saying things can be considered and whether things are considered cumulatively from a planning point of view. And it's important to stress today, because I understand that there's a misconception from the meeting on the 6th, we're not saying that these matters aren't considered, and actually that's why we've brought the Environmental Health Officer along today. When we're looking at the planning, land use planning matters, we are still looking at the air quality, we are still looking at the noise, we are still looking at the dust, which is why they're all within the officer report, they're all within the conditions. So we're not saying that these are discounted, but when you're talking about a process and whether something is tried and tested, whether something is modelled, all of those things are tested and come through the permit, and as part of that permit application, the environmental health officers are then part of that process again, so they're actually getting that modelling in there. What we've done is the air quality modelling that's been done as part of this application has gone to the Environment Agency and it's gone to the environmental health officers. Now, it's unfortunate that we don't have the environmental health officer that dealt with the air quality, but that will all be within your pack. And I'll just now look to Mr. Morley to say whether he wants to add something to that from his perspective.
It was my colleague who looked at the air quality report. It is really up to the Environment Agency to carry out a thorough assessment of the report, because they have modelling packages that they can use to compare what they find with the consultant's report.
And so we're back to the fact that we've checked again with everything that came out of that meeting from the 6th of September and everything that you already had before you for that meeting, and there has been no questioning of the end result of the air quality statistics, and that will be further examined when it goes through the permit application. So from a point of view, from the planning process, we have made sure that all of that information is assessed, and we've taken account of the comments back, and there have been no objections from any of those parties.
So on page 29, at the very top B, the effects of water vapour released from the proposed wastewater treatment plant on local atmospheric conditions. What is my role? To make sure there's not a nasty cloud? I mean, where's my role fit into that? Because I can understand the noise, okay, but where's my role of that if there's nothing, if it's all to do with the Environment Agency?
So when we're looking at that, from a land use planning point of view, we'll have looked at the landscape elements of that, so in terms of what you see from a visual side of things. So again, we had full advice from the relevant officer at
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I just ask, what is my role? What is our role here under that? If I can't have that, where's my role? Is that...
Yeah, legal. I think the legal officer needs to clarify your question.
I think I probably need to answer more generally rather than specifically on point B, and it's because there is a slight crossover between the regulatory regime and the planning regime. So the environmental impact of emissions on the atmosphere is a material consideration when you're looking at the land planning use, as Emma has just set out. And likewise, the fact that there's a stringent permitting regime is also a material consideration. So what members need to do is, from a land planning use point of view, understand and decide whether they are satisfied. And again, as Emma has set out, the consultees have come back and they are satisfied, and conditions have been put in place. And if needs be, I can take you through those. And then members are looking to see whether any of the residual concerns that they might have are ones that can correctly be used, can correctly be addressed by the permitting regime. So it is a difficult balance because there's that blurring between the two regimes. But what you need to be considering is the land planning use and whether the conditions that officers have proposed and the responses that have come back satisfy you. If you are worried about what is in this vapour, that is something that the Environment Agency have confirmed they will look at. That's set out in the current report. And then you can decide whether you're satisfied that if that's your sort of residual concern, whether you're happy to rely on paragraph 183 and allow the regulatory body, the EA, to deal with those issues as the expert in that field.
Councillor Bradman.
Thank you for that very helpful summary. I refer back to a paragraph in the previous application, which is in September, page 23. It's paragraph 5.8, looking at air quality. And it talks about the fact that we must not duplicate the work of, what is the word? We mustn't duplicate the work of regulation. And it says, I can read more of it if people are interested, but certainly the relevant bit says, both air quality reports have stated that emissions will be tested as part of the commissioning process to ensure that the emission rates do not exceed the modelled values and it is advised that this is a requirement to be covered under the environmental permit as appropriate. And it refers earlier to the fact that we as a planning authority must not duplicate the work of the Environment Agency because they are the experts with the skill and knowledge of that. So that's just to help clarify our thinking perhaps.
That's a very pertinent point, Councillor Bradman. So .38, so we'll be back by 11:45. Thank you very much. Please.
think it's you can only
You can't
have one.
anyway. You can't.
Speaking. Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry, Mr. David Ball, then.
The proposed plant will create unknown, probably hazardous emissions and a widely visible plume. It will also significantly add to global warming without any significant benefits. Surely we now understand that these issues must be taken into account in the planning process. The incinerator would be one of the most inefficient in the country, far less efficient than Waterbeach would have been. Burning wood to create energy, only 8% of which will go into the national grid as useful energy. The other 92% will go via the evaporator unit directly into the atmosphere with CO2 and harmful pollutants. These toxins have not been recognised, evaluated or acknowledged in the application, or it appears by the planning officers. So not only will this plant harm the local weather conditions, as others have spoken about, but it will also contribute unnecessarily to climate change. Further, the building of this inefficient plant will also waste precious energy resources and cause further pollution. Water itself is a valuable resource and can and should be cleaned by other already existing and tested methods. The website of the Earthworms Group, the fundraisers of this project, stated that wastewater from the food and plastics industry would be treated at the Warboys site. Nowhere in the planning proposal was this mentioned, and it has now disappeared from that website. Warboys has been the victim of sleight of hand before. We are increasingly becoming aware of the side effects and longevity of plastics in our environment. The effect of processing waste from the plastics industry has not been considered or evaluated. You, our councillors, stressed your grave concerns when you reluctantly approved this application on the 6th of September. How can you feel confident in letting this go ahead? Please refuse it now for all our futures.
Any questions, members, for Mr. Ball? No.
At the planning meeting, Betty Ball from Warboys Landfill Action Group. At the planning meeting on the 6th of September, councillors were clearly unhappy with giving the Warboys site approval and openly struggled to find legitimate reasons to refuse. They were advised that concerns over emissions must be left to the Environment Agency to decide after the planning issue had been dealt with. There are several legal cases where it clearly states that it is the responsibility of the Planning Committee to consider the impacts of emissions, location and amenity, and not simply defer this to the EA. This is particularly important where a new, untried and untested process is proposed. I will highlight two. In the case of Hopkins Development versus the Secretary of State, paragraph 15 states, planning authorities should focus on the impacts rather than the control of emissions. But that does not mean that they must subordinate their judgment on the impacts to those of the Pollution Control Authority. There is great concern in Warboys over the detrimental effects of emissions, backed up by informed health professionals who presented their concerns to the 6th of September meeting. In the case of Harrison versus the Secretary of State, paragraph 21, the thrust of the decision in Hopkins is that the planning decision maker was entitled to reach his own conclusions as to the impact of the proposed development on amenity and whether the site under consideration was the appropriate location for the proposed development. The advice gives you, as our councillors, permission to make up your own minds about whether you are confident that we in Warboys are being protected from a proposal which has in no way proved its safety for our community. Do not wait until we have serious health issues foisted on Warboys. The case of Harrison continues. If the planning decision maker considered that there might be adverse consequences because of the effects of the proposed development on amenity and/or issues as to the appropriateness of locating the development on the site in question, he was entitled to have regard to such matters as material considerations in making his decision on the planning merits of the proposed development.
Thank you for that. Any questions from Mrs. Ball? No. So, Mrs. Susan Wright.
Thank you for letting me speak. I would like to say this is relevant to the effects of water vapour released from the proposed waste treatment plant chimney on the local atmospheric conditions, but it's different from what's already been said. There are many incinerators working in this country currently, and they come up before committees like this regularly. The wastewater evaporator proposed at Warboys is in a different matter. There are none operating in the UK, although the applicant claims they are working in the USA. It's not here. The applicant has built 2 facilities speculatively in the UK, in Daventry and at Meridian. They are not operational as they have not received permits from the Environment Agency, although I should say one has recently been allowed on a temporary basis to do some testing, always useful. This means that when the application came to the committee, they had no data on which to base their views or either safety of the operation or the possible emissions into the local atmosphere from the plume. The content of the application document was vague, unscientific and overconfident. At the 6th of September meeting, the applicant told councillors that the facility of this type had a permit, which at that time was not true. Your legal advice was that the possible emissions could not be considered in the planning process. When does the planning process require all that information and presumably ignore it and the contrary views? We were told that the process has to believe what it is told to be correct. Okay. I think we believe that the planning officers should question, not blindly accept. We do therefore urge you to reconsider this application and refuse it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any questions for Mrs. Wright? No. Thank you very much. So, Dr. Rona Allery, please.
The A14 workers work shifts, so sleep in the day. And as the A14 is behind schedule and is not even due to finish until December 2020, the workers will be there when the proposed CHP plant is operational. The attenuation by caravan insulation is puny, so they will be able to hear indoors 3 machines, each operating 75 to 85 decibels, 24/7. Also running 24/7 is the walking floor, which has a noise level of 105 decibels, equivalent to a jet taking off at 100 metres. So the noise will be intolerable, especially when trying to sleep. Many of you will have cheered your children, grandchildren on at a youngsters' football match. You can easily hear people shout from one end of the pitch to the other. These pitches are approximately 100 metres long. The caravan site will be just past the goalposts at the other end. Are you really going to say they won't be impacted by industrial noise along with the other houses? Government policies say that councillors can and should consider cumulative effects of developments on a site. The noise monitoring was done with Woodford's knowledge, and hence it was very quiet for 2 days, such that Leslie Dunkling thought Woodford had closed down. The noise modelling also produced in the report is obviously flawed, as it predicts when the site is operational that the nighttime noise will decrease. I fail to see how. The noise from the current site has been intolerable for local residents, and there have been several complaints. One day this was caused by the current site operators shredding the stockpile of wood that they'd stored in readiness for the new operation. This is an operation that the officers had considered too noisy to be permitted for the CHP, but it's already happened. It sounded like World War III and will happen again. What must it have been like in the caravans? I can hear it in my house, which is on the previous picture, but further back than the near ones. A few years ago, this committee approved longer hours for Woodford and Saturday mornings on the grounds that there would be less vehicles to the site than when the landfill was in operation. This is clearly going to be wrong, and I don't believe that the 26 an hour or whatever it was stated will stay, as Woodford has said that it will double their business and will be taking giant lorries of wood in. There may be evaporators working in America, but in such a vast country, I don't think they will be close to properties, do you? How can you therefore rely on information from that country? You must refuse this application or destroy lives and commit war boys to be blighted for the next 25 years or more.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions at all, Councillor Howell?
I think it's only fair I'll allow Councillor Hudson first. I've had my...
Hudson, if you're...
It's, Chair, thank you. It's a personal question. I understand exactly how I've got to think. The potential noise experienced by the occupants of the caravan situated at the western end of Fenside Road is one of the things we're talking about, yeah? And I've heard a lot about these caravans, and these caravans are, and I just need this is some personal explanation, please, from officers and legal, yeah? These caravans are on an unlicensed site. They've appeared for the use of the A14 guys, ladies, whomever working. Legally, it doesn't matter if the district council turns a blind eye. Legally, they are still there illegally. I think that is correct. Yeah. So therefore, are we able to consider reference A, the noise on the caravans, on a bunch of caravans that are there illegally and not permanently, but illegally? I just want to know because it's a bit new.
Who would like to answer that one? Legal or?
Go to legal first.
Legal.
Thank you, members. As set out previously, the site has a planning permission, but that planning permission is for the use of touring caravans. There's been a suggestion there's a licence, but we don't actually have confirmation of that. And I think one of the public speakers suggested that meant that caravans could stay for 2 weeks, but then had to be off the site again. So what we do know is that it does have planning permission, but only for a touring use. It's not being used for that purpose at the moment, therefore it's in breach of planning control. The district council would be entitled to take planning enforcement action if they consider it expedient to do so. At the moment, it appears they have decided not to and that they don't consider it expedient, but that doesn't mean that it's not unlawful. So the use currently is unlawful unless for any reason the time period for enforcement action has expired, but we don't believe that to be the case. Moving on to the noise of the noise effect on the caravans, you have heard from the Environmental Health Officer, and it is set out in the report, that the caravan site is further back than the nearest receptors that were tested, and you've also heard that the testing is in the garden, so people experiencing the noise outside and not with the benefit of the insulation, thank you, Chair, that the houses will provide. And therefore, and I'm sure the EHO will correct me if I'm wrong, although the caravans have less noise insulation, because we didn't take that into account with the houses, they're not, I think I could say, in a worse position because they're caravans. Does that clear things up for you, Councillor?
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, it's completely. So the caravans are there illegally. The other question was actually, should this committee consider this on what is an illegal occupation of the land? Should we be considering the noise for the caravans at all? If not, fine, but if so, we need to know that.
I think, if I may, I'd suggest that you try and avoid getting confused about whether you should or shouldn't take them into account. The important thing to remember is that the The steer that we've had from the professionals on the noise assessment is whether they're there or they're not there, it won't make any difference because the assessments that have been received have taken into account the correct information and have been considered from outside. So I think I'd probably just focus on that bit rather than get too hung up about the rest of the what's legal and what isn't.
Thanks very much. That's fine now. I understand everything. Thank you.
You've got it all.
It's all been explained.
Councillor Howell.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to paraphrase what the last speaker said. They said there were some complaints made with regards to the current operation by the site, what's there at the moment. Can we be told how many complaints have been made? Do we have that? And from the caravan park, is there any complaints being made from that, and how many?
We do have an item later on in the agenda that is an enforcement update report. I do have the Principal Enforcement and Monitoring Officer in the room. Whether she has the precise number for the war boys that relate to that report, I would need to get her to double check on that. I am not aware of any of them coming from the caravan park. If that's a specific answer, I'll just look at her and she's agreeing with me.
It's just the caravan park.
Yeah, I believe the complaints have come from residents that are in the room at the moment.
So does that clarify your situation? So we're all finished, have we, there? So thank you very much. So, oh, sorry, Councillor Bradman.
To progress this longer than it should be, but it occurs to me that depending on the timing at which these caravans were occupied, it's perfectly possible that this planning authority did not consult with them in the same way as they consulted and wrote to the caravans that are parked further down the site, as Ms Vass showed us elsewhere. Because if they weren't occupied at the time this application was going through, and I don't know that, it's possible the people living in those caravans, albeit temporary, albeit out with any permit, they may not have been aware that they had an opportunity to comment. Now, I'm sorry, and I don't wish to muddy the waters, but that's why I was asking that's why I was following up the question about when the caravan site was there, because I have a feeling it's possible those people have not been consulted, and that's why they haven't sent in any complaints.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between a complaint and an objection. So what started to come in about the existing site, bear in mind that the new site isn't there. So the complaints that have come in have been related to either the landfill and the landfill capping that's taken place on the site, or in relation to the materials recycling facility, the MRF. In relation to people being consulted, there would have been a site notice that went up. They will also have seen us walking around, and they would have been in occupation at the point we were all walking around. And if you remember, we took a detour on our site as well to be able to walk around and up onto the bridge to actually look down. So I think, you know, they have had ample opportunity. And I think some of the workers, no doubt, would have been contacted. I'd be surprised if they haven't been contacted by either local residents or the parish council. But I think there is a difference between an objection and a complaint coming about an existing site, which is different to what the applicant is here for today.
Further thing that occurs to me is that some of those people living, albeit temporary or long-term, in those caravans might actually work at the site.
No, I think we're pretty sure that there are A14 workers.
So, that addresses your concerns, Councillor Bradman, does it? So, thank you very much. So, after that, so could we have Miss Serena Allery, please?
Hello, my name's Serena Allery, and I've lived in the village all my life. The unique topography and microclimate of the Warboys landfill site by the escarpment of Warboys has not been considered. It's also very different to American topography. The proposed evaporator chimney would be 17 metres high, and the proposed site is below the escarpment of Warboys Fen, which is 31 metres high. so the unique environment will trap much more moisture from the plume. Evaporating the leachate with all its contaminants will only add moisture and toxins to the environment 24/7. Without the capacity to distribute the excess moisture, polluted fog will form along with localised ice on colder days. This will make the roads and nearby junctions, including that with the caravan site, and obviously caravans being towed are very slow to move, and it will make it, where there's already very limited visibility there, make it very dangerous to the many people that are living there.
Could I just say, could I just stop you there with respect? We've heard all these points before, to be honest. Have you got anything new to add? It's obviously with respect to, I think the committee have taken all those points on board.
Well, this is about the road for the caravan site, and also there's people who live there who like to walk and run, cycle, walk their dogs down Fenside Road because there's footpaths off there. The atmospheric inversion that Professor Lake was talking about earlier would only exacerbate this situation because obviously low visibility means that the lorries will less likely see these recreational users, which are sharing this single track road with the huge lorries.
But it doesn't relate to noise, that does it? So,
this is to do with the moisture.
Well,
in the plume.
You're just going to keep to moisture now, are you?
I'm speaking about the moisture, yes.
Right. So, yeah. Okay.
And the applicants themselves state that the odour from the plume, which is where the moisture is coming from, may be highly offensive, which shows that it's not known what pollutants may be in the emissions. If you ever walked in Scottish mountains when it's cold and misty, you'll know that the mist condenses on you, your eyelashes, your clothes and your skin. When you go into a warm house, this water evaporates, whereas with the leachate evaporator, there would be contaminants which would build up, causing health issues such as eczema and asthma, or being absorbed through the skin, causing systemic toxicity. Pollutants which are emitted into the atmosphere but are not water-soluble would remain at a low height when trapped below the inversion layer. Health effects would not be limited to humans, but would also affect animals such as horses, cats, dogs, cows, sheep, chickens, etc. The health of our beloved pets would be adversely affected, and the build-up of toxins in our body would be further exacerbated by the consumption of eggs or meat from exposed animals and exposed vegetables grown in the local area. Cambridge Water supplies the water in the area, and Anglian Water does the sewerage services. They should be reconsulted regarding the excess moisture from the plume and the unusual microclimate that is Warboys. Thank you.
Salary? No, can't see any at all. Thank you for that. Mrs. Karen Armstrong, please.
Thank you. My name is Karen Armstrong. The Armstrong family have lived and farmed on Puddock Road a few hundred metres from the landfill site for over 100 years. We as a family, alongside many others who live in Warboys, are very concerned about what will be admitted in the water vapour from this site. How can any assessment be completed by the Environment Agency for a permit on water vapour and noise on something that has not been previously in this country been completed before? I'm a bit baffled. Perhaps you can clarify for me. When the noise assessment was completed, how does anyone assess on something that is not there? What are they assessing against? What are they looking for? What is acceptable? I don't understand. How can water vapour be assessed on a process that has not been tested by any governing body before in this country? How can, as a gentleman from the Environment Agency stated, a noise assessment be asked to be assessed again as it didn't fit the figures? This is not a true reading. You can do anything again and again until it fits the model. That's what you can do. In regards to lorry movement noise, 26 lorries per hour versus 20 per hour, as the lady stated before, traffic has increased over the years. It hasn't declined. Everybody knows who uses the roads in this area that there is a lot more traffic. Even if the residents in the caravan site did not answer correspondence or did not object, they should not just be brushed aside. They look to you, the experts, to protect their future and their health. You, our councillors, had concerns when you reluctantly approved this application on the 6th of September. How can you feel confident in letting this go ahead? Please refuse it now for all our futures.
Thank you, Mrs. Armstrong. Any questions? No, I can't see any hands raised. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to object to the proposal on behalf of myself and the farming community. I'd also like to thank members for agreeing to revisit the particular matter of the toxic vapour plume that affects this locality. Those of us that live in the fen are only too aware of the unique local conditions that occur in the area at certain times of the year. I refer specifically to the low-level fogs that develop over the flat landscape to the north of the proposed plant. As mentioned before, these are known as inversion fogs. And indeed, the effects of this are known throughout history, leading to the stories of the witchcraft for which Warboys is famous. The proposed plant will pump out a continuous plume of warm, wet and chemically laden vapour, which will not rise up and disperse on the cool mornings. Instead, the vapour is likely to descend and flow out across the fens as a chemical smog, coating everything in its path. The application admits the deposition of ammonia and heavy metals such as mercury, cadmium and arsenic. The models that the applicant used to predict the deposition of these toxins do not take into the account the local effects of the topography. The result is, rather than dispersion, we will have full concentrated toxic vapour at ground level, directly coating people, animals, crops and soil. It's common when driving from the village of Warboys down the Puddock Hill to pass from bright sunlight into thick fog at the base of the hills. These fogs often last many hours and sometimes persist all day. When the proposed plant is active, these conditions prevail. The lowland area will be bathed in a chemical smog produced by this plant for many hours. The generic air quality models used in this application do not take into account these local topographic effects. As a result, they potentially massively underestimate the level of exposure of people, crops and wildlife to the contaminants the applicants admit will come from the plant. As a farmer in the area, I find this alarming. I would like to reiterate what I said at the last meeting. A large portion of the farm produce undergoes random and detailed testing by supermarkets to look for contaminants such as heavy metals. These can be done down to a level of 1 part per billion. If these are found, the entire crop may be destroyed and the possibility of the farm being blacklisted from supplying the customer in the future. This may well result in the failure of a business which has invested heavily in producing high-quality vegetables for these markets. In years to come, as levels of contamination build up in the land, and the problems start to be detected, who will be around to pay for the compensation to families and businesses? I expect the operators would evaporate faster than their putrid water vapour at the first sign of trouble, leaving behind a trail of misery and health problems for this council to deal with. In summary, the application has not considered or understood the unique local weather patterns and their effect on the vapour plume, and the planning officers have also failed to understand and take into account these major local effects. So their supposition that this can be dealt with by the environmental permit is equally flawed. Members of the committee, for these reasons, I ask you to have the courage to reject this proposal. Thank you.
Spot on, Mr. Whittam. Any questions from Mr. Whittam? Councillor Bradman.
Thank you very much for that. I just wanted to ask you, you said in your presentation, as you come down the hill, and I'm very aware of what temperature inversion looks like and what effect it can have, but do you not think then that the stack of 17 metres, which is 55 feet high, will not take the emissions above that level? Because it's in my experience that when you see temperature inversion, often what you see is low cloud hanging around tree level. So you often see trees poking up through fog. And so my feeling is, I absolutely, can I just say, I absolutely understand your concerns and your anxiety. But my feeling is that the stack is likely to take the emissions above that inversion layer.
If I can just make a comment on that. The stack is 17 metres high. The escarpment of the land there is about 30 metres high. So the stack is actually below the height of the... So when we get the prevailing winds coming from the Warboys direction, what will actually happen is the wind will come across the top and you'll have a further effect of pressing this this heavy, wet material down into the lowland valley below. That'll be the effect. So unless you were to build a stack significantly higher, so it was above the height of the hill, there, I don't think you will get the dispersion, which I don't think that's been correctly modelled going forward, and I believe that's one of the fundamental flaws that we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradman. I can't see any hands raised. Oh, sorry.
There was some pretty emotive language there. Toxic fog across the farmland, chemical smog, and different chemicals were also mentioned. Will these add to the atmospheric conditions, as said in B there? Is this true? Will this smog actually do that? I'm looking at the top of page 29, the two issues, where it says B. Will this add to the atmospheric conditions, please, as the speaker said?
I think what I would draw your attention to is that planning officers have to be led by the experts. Yes. The experts we have gone to is the Environment Agency and the Environmental Health Officers. They have looked at the modelling work that's been done. They have looked at the information that's come in, and they have not raised any objections or concerns. And when it comes to the chemical mass and whether the chimney height is high enough to take account of the concerns being raised, that will all be for the Environment Agency and for the permit. Now, I realise that once again is going to be seen as officers aren't taking it into account, but planning officers have to be led by the experts, and we can only give you that expert advice that's been given to us.
Chairman, I just think we just had a farmer here, and I've no reason to disbelieve him. He knows his job well. That, one of the comments was about with regards to supermarket testing for particular things. I think it's a great shame that we don't have somebody here who, from the Environment Agency, that we can speak to and say, what is the impact on this? What would be the landfill, or the fall of chemicals on this? And at the moment, I'm having to ask somebody who's having to think back to a report, and they're not an expert in this, and I appreciate that. I think it's a great shame at the moment. I feel starting to be now uncomfortable that we're having some technical things here, and we can't ask that with regards to the land use of this particular site. And I'm not talking about the land use.
Yeah, I think, and I do understand where the concerns come in from both sides, but I will come back to the fact that even if permission is granted, the operation can never take place without an environmental permit. Now, I have worked closely with the Environment Agency, and in the same way as I set it up for Waterbeach, I have said I would set it up for Warboys, that at the point any permit application went in to the Environment Agency and it had been duly made, then I would ensure that all the people that have written in, that have come to these meetings, etc., to speak, are notified of that, and they then have 2 opportunities to go in and to make their concerns directly to those specialists. And that was something that I'll do, and I've also promised the local member, if that happens, that is what I will do for the local community as well. And that's the best that I can do from a planning point of view.
We thank you for that. That does clarify the situation. Councillor Bradman.
Right, okay, thank you. I refer back to the papers from our consideration in September, and I refer back to the statement by the statutory consultee, Public Health England, and they were talking about point source emissions to air, and they referred to the fact that dispersion modelling using atmospheric dispersion modelling system has been used to predict the resulting ground level pollutant concentrations due to emissions from the 25-metre stack for the combustor. The resultant predicted environmental concentrations were assessed as unlikely to be significant. Therefore, emissions to air are not expected to cause any significant impact to human health. In addition, the site doesn't lie in or in the vicinity of any air quality management areas. And that was our paragraph 5.27. Now, as the Ms. Fitch has said, we have to take the advice of our technical consultees. And if Public Health England have said that they are not concerned about or rather they have looked at and considered the concerns to do with human health and they say that they think there is not a problem. We are not in a position to dispute that, I think.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jan England. I live at Broadpool Farm and also run a marketing company on Fenside Road. We're allowed to talk about water vapour here today, and inevitably water vapour doesn't only contain water. It contains traces of chemicals. The applicants have already told us that. We know not what, because the applicants have suggested that leachate from the Warboys site plus other landfill sites will be used along with wastewater from food manufacturing, chemical plants and other industries. We know for a fact that 250,000 tonnes of unknown chemicals were dumped in the Warboys landfill site many years ago from a company called Silbeco, who specialise in minerals and chemicals. So that's just the start. The plume of water vapour generated by this cooling chimney will disperse unknown chemicals across the fen and over the village, depending upon the wind speed and direction, and could reach several kilometres distance. The unknown chemicals will enter watercourses, rivers, and ultimately the sea. I'm a market researcher, and we've recently posed a question to the UK public. We had a sample of 2,500 people. 91% said they're concerned about what's entering our rivers and seas. Is the council willing to allow applicants to exacerbate this problem with no thought for the local people or the environment? It's no good saying it will be monitored. The Environment Agency, in their guidance for the treatment of landfill leachate, do not actually cover an evaporation process. So how will they know what to monitor, and they're not responsible for environmental monitoring beyond the site anyway? With no previous examples of this untried and untested process, who can say what will happen when these various chemicals are mixed together? Those hazardous chemicals could be rapidly dispersed, causing poison in the atmosphere. Who's to say that Legionella, or even something as toxic as arsenic, mercury, ammonia and lead won't be present, as these are common chemicals found in leachate? I'm not a scientist, but I've read that Legionella exists in 40 to 60% of cooling towers. There's an example in France where Legionella travelled 6 kilometres and killed many people from a plant with a cooling tower similar to this. There have been several recent cases of ammonia poisoning in the UK this year. One was mentioned yesterday only in the Grocer. Everything from the Warboys site plume would be at bedroom height across the village if it happened to go that way. Bearing in mind that Michael Gove, Environment Secretary, is releasing his UK Clean Air Strategy and detailed National Air Pollution Control Programme early in 2019, that's going to feature local air quality plans, protecting the nation's health and protecting the environment. Do you, as county councillors, really want to carry the can for any poison in the atmosphere? I would urge you to refuse planning permission on this water vapour issue alone. Please don't put a local population and the environment at risk. Thank you.
Any questions? No. So finally, we've got the last of the public speakers now. It's Simon Collins, please.
No, it's Mr. Mark England.
No, it's Simon Collins.
We haven't got.
We haven't got a Mark England. We've only got Simon Collins at number 18. Oh, well, I haven't had that.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's an updated one. So we should have Mr. Mark England, and I think I'm right in saying Mr. Simon Collins won't be in attendance because he's already read his statement. So we'll with the last person, but it'll be Mr. Mark England.
So we'll have Mark England now as the last public speaker then. Thank you.
Thing isn't working. There you go.
Right. My name is Mark England. I'm a 4th generation farmer, and my uncle farmed up against this site when it was still a brickyard. So I can assure you I'm no stranger to the area and well aware that this inversion does take place at considerable height. Sometimes it will even obscure the wind turbines that are located out in the fen. So do not be fooled by this height of the chimney solving the problem, because it won't. I believe that the water vapour emissions from this site pose a real and potential danger to the environment and the local communities. To the northwest and directly adjacent to the site are Warboys and Wistow Woods. a rare block in Huntingdonshire of over 100 acres of woodland, designated as sites of special scientific interest. The latter is a Beds and Hunts Wildlife Trust Nature Reserve. These woods are of very ancient origin. They are a relic of the Anglo-Saxon Brunswold, which stretched from here to Rockingham in Northamptonshire. As described by Natural England, there is a diverse range of rare and sensitive flora and fauna and wildlife in these woods. This will be put at risk from the water vapour emissions from this site. Natural England have designated these woods as at red, high risk under their traffic light environmental risk assessment, and are currently funding a 5-year restoration project in the woods to turn this around. To the southeast of the site, only yards from the entrance to the site, we have yet another Beds and Hunts nature reserve, the Pingle Wood Cutting. Both reserves are frequented by visitors and dog walkers who risk exposure to any water vapour emissions from this site. I find it hard to believe that the County Planning Department is prepared to take such risks with the environment and human health on the premise that because it will be monitored by the Environment Agency, everything will be all right. I know from personal experience how poor the agency's performance is in reality, not only from the past history of the illegal dumping of toxic waste in the old clay pit, but also in how inadequate they've been only recently in policing water abstraction and use within the fenlands during the drought of the last summer. On the subject of water vapour, you've already been misled into thinking that the Internal Drainage Board did not offer any objection to the planning application. They were a statutory consultee. The truth is that they did object to this application, but for unresolved reasons, their decision did not reach you. There are 1,625 hectares, that's 4,000 acres of farmland in the catchment and downwind at risk from this site. If you add to that the 4,850 hectares, 12,000 acres, in the neighbouring IDB of Warboys, you begin to realise the scale of the contamination risk involved from the emissions of this site.
You're on the red now, so...
Very brief then, last sentence. In this age of David Attenborough, when we need a people's seat, I hope and implore you to reject this application based on untried and unproven combined technology for the sake of our environment and the health of our local communities.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions for Mr. England? Oh, Councillor Hunt, you have one.
Yes, I was obviously quite aware that this was a railway station originally, and I presume it closed in something like the 1960s. You mentioned the brickworks, and so am I right in thinking that it was a railway station, it became a brickworks, and now it's got its current use?
I would say it was originally, I should say the railway was probably directed that way because of the
Beside it, and did the brick... Yes, but and did that brickyard have chimneys?
Which came first, the railway or chimneys?
Brickworks came first, then the railway, because the railway went through to Ramsey, as I believe. And did the brickworks have any chimneys? So there were 4 chimneys there. So there has been at least 1 chimney. But our officer says 4. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So that concludes. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Just I got away with that lightly. Carry on.
No chance. We've just a quick question. The gentleman just mentioned an apparent objection from the Drainage Board. Could I get a bit of clarity on the officers from that please?
Yes, just to confirm they were consulted, but no objections or comments were received from them. That was outlined in the report. We have not been approached by them in any way, so we have to assume that they have no objection. Without an objection, I'm afraid I can't comment any further.
Right, so, yeah, so...
Okay, so what we're saying is you believe that the IDB passed it to middle level, but middle level didn't actually submit it to us? Okay, that's fine. We'll note that down in the minutes.
So that concludes public speakers. So now I would like to invite District Councillor Jewel Taverner to speak to members. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. I think the first thing to confirm is the licence stroke permit that is being held at the caravan site. There is a permit to have the site open from March until October. The site was previously owned, I believe, for about 5 years as a caravan site, but that was not developed because of the landfill that was going on at the time. The current owner, Mr. Adams, he has not been consulted. He's not had anything in writing to him. He doesn't live at the site, so that's possibly the reason for it. The people that are at the site, the workers, they wouldn't be aware of what was going on. They are at work all day or all night. They do shift work and do go home sometimes on weekends. Other than that, they are there permanently for the next possibly 2 years. Mr. Adams has become aware and emailed to me yesterday this for me to read out to you today. I felt that it was a negative effect on the Caravans Park business, which is reliant on holidaymakers looking for peace, quiet and relaxation. I'm extremely concerned, to say the very least. There are further concerns about heavy trucks passing over the magnetic bridge, which has a weight restriction. Our caretaker, and the caretaker, by the way, is permanently there, witnessed articulate lorries passing over the Wick Bridge. Estimated the truck's weight is in excess of 30 tonnes. This is because they're trying to cut the corner off. So they're coming through from Warboys and cutting that corner off and going over the bridge. He was the person who's on the site. He was an ex-transport manager with extensive knowledge in this area. I fear the structural integrity of the bridge cannot hold up if there isn't any form of traffic controls put in force in the case of the delivery trucks taking the wrong way going to the recycle centre. The noise test, we heard from the gentleman there that he felt that they were too high, so they redid them. I think that is a point to be noted, that we can't fix the results. Right, okay. So, on conclusion, they're using non-hazardous wood. What is the definition of non-hazardous wood? Because I believe it is written that it's paint and various other materials that have been put onto the wood. The water vapour or plume will have an effect, as there is no other plant like this. One has to ask how this was measured. There is evidence reducing burning wood, coal and paraffin improved the air quality and limited the presence of fog for London and beyond. Why reverse this working programme? Mr. Vauxhall, by his own admission, is not sure what the water vapour contains. Measures and tests done have been against existing results or developments. Emphasis plants like this do not exist. Sorry, I can't read my own writing because I was writing. Desktop analysis is not good enough. Noise from the vehicles will increase on the inadequate road, which is not fit for purpose. Councils are working to improve air quality, health and well-being, and the conservation. So this, I think, is something that we all need to take into consideration seriously. Thank you.
Any questions at all for Councillor Taverner? No. I see no. Thank you. Now, I'd like to invite our very own Terry Rogers to speak to members. Thank you very much. Do what you're most comfortable with, Councillor Rogers.
Be a nice change, I think. Thank you. Can I congratulate Councillor Howell, if I may, on his observation that it would have been very nice if we'd have had the experts here rather than allowing or relying on hearsay evidence. Because in many instances, I believe that we have been led up the garden path on the odd occasion. To that effect, I must say, and I leave it to your own judgment, I am not impressed by our Environmental Health Officer's statements. I think it's already been said that the background noise was measured and then had to be reassessed. Secondly, when questioned on water vapour, oh, well, I can't answer that question because I'm not the expert to that. It's my contemporary who should have been here but isn't here. And other statements made led me to question as what expertise was presented before you by this particular individual, because it certainly didn't impress me one iota, if I may say that. I have a question that has been bugging me all day to an extent, but before I do that, can I just speak to Councillor Husband? I'm not interested in caravans, I'll be quite honest about that. They bore if I see one on the road, I hate them. What I am interested is in people, and it's the people we should consider in the caravans. Now, be they what we would call a touring caravan agreement, if they arrive on day 1 and they leave on day 14, they're legitimate. And somebody else moves in, arrives on day 1 and leaves on day 14, they're legitimate. So there could be a continuance of 30 caravans being occupied on this site at any one time. And that is what I feel is what we should be addressing, not the legitimacy of this site. As it stands, because of the expediency of the District Council relying on this site to provide accommodation for workers from the A14, because they can't certainly provide accommodation, because as we know with the rate of homelessness in the county at the moment, that is questionable. So the accommodation isn't there, so we're relying on this site to a degree. And it's not 30 people we're talking about, it's probably nearly 90 to 100 people, because knowing these typical type of construction workers, there's probably 3 or 4 beds to a caravan. But I haven't been in a caravan, so I can't justify that. So that worried me, but I hope that answers the question, Peter, that you've addressed. It's the people, not the caravans, and that. One point I do, and I said earlier, I really do question is, does this committee, and it's been mentioned by 2 of the observers sitting behind me here, that there was a High Court ruling and case law raised, and I think Mr. Reeves, in his letter or his email to you, gave the background to that and the results of the High Court's judge verdict and recommendation on that. Now, do you accept that ruling and case law? If not, it raises the question of the legitimacy of the conditions imposed on this particular hearing. But if you do, then it has significant bearing on your previous committee judgment. And I say that because not all of the evidence that should have been allowed to be brought before you was allowed. I can remember quite distinctly the officers advising me that things like noise, pollution, air, dust would be dealt with by the Environment Agency. And similarly, when I raised that at last meeting, the first words the chairman said in his opening address at the end of the meeting was very similar to my thoughts, that the Environment Agency would take care of those particular questions and problems. However, I don't think that's the case, because this case that has been mentioned says that we, as a county council, have a right to look at those issues as well. And I don't think we did last time, and I'm not sure, and I hope we have, but I think we have this time to a degree, but not as much. I didn't realize I had a time on my thing. I thought I was allowed an open time. Can I go back then, and I'll push through, because I don't want to repeat what's been said already. As I said, you've already heard this there. I think it was wrong when you were given the message water vapour. It's not water vapour. It's water plus. And I think we've all heard the evidence that that's yeah. On the question of noise, the other thing that worries me is we're not allowed to take into account accumulation of noise. And really, last time it was explained to you, you were only allowed to take into account the noise generated by the new biomass burner. There is background noise, and that was already explained to a degree by the EHO. But if you add the accumulation of noise, that has a serious effect on this particular caravan site. I went there the other day and I just listened, and without the biomass burner, it was extremely loud. With the biomass burner, they said they've modelled it, but I don't know how they've modelled it. There's no evidence to how they've modelled it. Our officers will tell you there is, but I haven't seen it. And that leaves me with a big burning question. Water vapour, I think you've heard the arguments as to why that shouldn't be allowed, and that shouldn't be allowed, nor should the biomass burner be allowed. And to noise, I believe, similarly, the biomass burner should not be allowed. That's all I have to say, ma'am.
Thank you very much, very eloquently put. So, members, before we proceed to the debate, I propose for a 15-minute adjournment, which will allow our legal advisor to finalise her advice in respect of the constitutional point raised by Mrs. Withams at the beginning of the meeting. So that's what we'll do. It is now 12:49. Yeah, so could we be back at 5 minutes past 1, please? And that's pretty sharp too. Thank you very much.
come back on a couple of the points, just to make sure that we're all clear. In relation to the points raised by Councillor Rogers, I want to confirm that both officers and members are fully aware of all the land use planning matters that need to be taken into account, and that the full information was in front of all members at the 6th of September meeting. Therefore, I cannot agree with Councillor Rogers when he says that the evidence was not in front of you at the last meeting. In particular, he referred to noise, which from my point of view was clarified in paragraphs 8.81 to 8.86 of the officer report. Air quality, which actually included human health as well, paragraphs 8.39 to 8.53, which also included dust. And other matters, which I'll take to mean things like odour, which was paragraph 8.85, visual impact, paragraphs 8.56 to 8.59, and traffic and highways, paragraph 8.60 to 8.69. As such, I come back to the point I made earlier in the meeting, that when reference was made to the Environment Agency and the permit in the 6th of September meeting, this was in relation to concerns about the untried and untested pollution risks. At no point did officers or members ever say that they could not take any of these points into account from an amenity or land use planning perspective. And indeed, the paragraphs detailed above provided support this. Finally, in relation to cumulative impacts, I can also assure you that the cumulative impacts can and have been fully assessed by the relevant specialists and officers. The specialist reports have to take account of what is there already and build upon that. Therefore, the cumulative assessments are not discounted in any way and have been taken into account in the EIA development. Indeed, it is worth noting that the comments made today by the Environmental Health Officer confirmed that both specialists and officers didn't just accept what was submitted by the applicant, and in the case of the noise assessment, it was felt that the background noise levels used by the applicants initially was inaccurate and not acceptable. I'm therefore disappointed that a local member took this to mean that Mr. Morley had not done his job incorrectly. Instead, I suggest it demonstrates how thoroughly he did his job and that we've never just accepted what has been put in front of us as officers. So thank you.
A clarification in those points, pertinent points. I don't... On this point, I will allow you to reply. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to say that I thought the performance by the EHO today was not, I think, of what I expected to come from said gentleman. Secondly, I would have hoped the officers, when Councillor Bradman asked a question about the combustor, and she was referring to the height of a combustor or the output from the combustor, they should have corrected her and said condenser, because there are two chimneys there. Yes, but you were referring to the wrong item. We were talking about, you were referring to the water vapour. Water vapour comes from the conductor and the condenser. You're right, well, that wasn't made plain by the officers. And secondly, I stick to my regard as the advice I was given before the last meeting, that there are a number of items that I wish to raise at that particular meeting would be addressed by the Environment Agency and would not need to be addressed by this planning committee. And that was said to me on 3 separate occasions. And I will also point out, and I wouldn't point it out before, that I attended a briefing with the officers in presence of the chairman 2 hours after it was agreed, because I was there at 1 o'clock and we weren't seen till 1:15. And that question was raised there, and that was witnessed by the chairman at the same time.
Would you like to reply to that, Ms. Fitch?
Yes, if I may, again, each time it was in relation to the environmental side of the permit, not the fact that the land use planning elements weren't considered. But I'm happy that we can move on. I think we've both made it clear where we're standing on that.
So we are going to move on because time is Sorry, Councillor Bradman, is it? If it's very quick.
Councillor Rogers, to be clear, I was quoting from the minutes. I was making the point, I emphasised the point that they were talking about the combustor, which is why I had also asked the question to the gentleman who I think has now had to leave about whether he thought that the height of the evaporator chimneys was sufficient to allow the emissions to be above the inversion layer. And he said, no, he didn't think they were. That was the point I was making, that this was a combustor chimney, and I was referring to would the evaporator chimney be above the inversion layer. I was making the contrast between the two.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for that robust discussion. So, with that, we'll move on to our legal officer to make her case for the adjournment. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, just to come back on a couple of points that have arisen throughout today's meeting. The first is in relation to the constitutional point raised at the start of the public speaking, and as to whether or not members were able to reach a different decision today. There is authority both in Section 70 of the Town and Country Planning Act and from case law which will allow for matters to be brought back before a committee in order to allow members to consider any factors which might influence their final decision, and that is why the matter came back to you today. In respect of the constitutional position, Rule 17.1 of Part 4.4 of the Constitution provides that a motion to amend or rescind a decision made at a meeting of the committee or subcommittee within the past 6 months, which this would be, cannot be moved unless a notice of motion is signed by at least half of the members of the relevant committee or subcommittee. Having looked at the Constitution, there's no provision that that written motion needs to be made before the meeting. Therefore, if during the debate members consider they do wish to reach a different decision to that reached in September, the meeting can be briefly adjourned for that written motion to be put together, and there would need the support of 4 members in order to do that. So if that becomes apparent during the debate, members can signal that they might like to take that option. Moving on more generally as to your debate that's about to take place, just to clarify the scope of that, as you were advised by Helen at the start of her presentation, this application has been brought back before the committee following receipt of a number of pieces of correspondence following the last meeting, and they related to the determination of that application. The 2 matters, therefore, that members are considering are whether the potential noise experienced by the occupants of the caravans situated at the western end of Fenside Road, and members are also considering the effects of water vapour released from the proposed wastewater treatment plant chimney on local atmospheric conditions. However, you should not look to open the debate on matters outside of those 2 specific points which you have heard on before. As to the potential effect from water vapour, there has been representation today from the objectors here, and with the written representations that you received on Tuesday and that Councillor Bradnam read this morning, that the committee should not place undue reliance on paragraph 183 of the MPPF in reaching its decision. As members are aware, paragraph 183 provides that the focus of planning decisions should be on whether proposed development is an acceptable use of land, rather than the control of processes or emissions. The committee should assume that those regimes will operate effectively. As I set out previously, members will be aware that there's a degree of overlap between planning and pollution controls. Both the environmental impact of emissions to the atmosphere, as well as the existence of a stringent permitting regime of both material planning considerations. Members must therefore consider on the information before them whether any of the concerns they have in respect of the whether any of the concerns they may have are such that the permission should be refused, or whether they are capable of being overcome under the permitting regime.
So thank you for that, that advice and that. So with that, the members have taken that all into consideration, what the legal officer said. So I'm going to open this up to debate now. So who wants to kick it off? Okay, Councillor Hartford.
First of all, I want to say thank you to all of you for coming again to talk to us about your concerns. And in response to the speaker who talked about us having the courage to refuse this, I would say that sometimes it takes greater courage to actually approve an application where there is obviously so much local concern, which unfortunately there are mitigations in place to address and which members have to take great account of. So maybe some of the things that I will say will not meet with your approval, but I have to say that I do have the courage to say what I think is right. For me, the whole issue that we're looking at today revolves around the fact that our role is to decide whether this is proper use of the land with the appropriate safeguards in place on the two items that we're considering today. I have to say that when we only look at those, to refuse this application would actually mean to me that members consider the Environment Agency, in this case the Safeguarding Agency for Safety of Emission Levels and Noise and their impact on local residents, is incompetent. And I think it would be a very brave member who would imply that. So looking at the two points that we are here to consider today, I have to say that for me, I have to accept what we're advised to do by the NPPF, which is to ensure that in allocating land use for a purpose, we have assured ourselves that the appropriate safeguards are in place. And I have to accept the advice and the non-objections from those experts. And unfortunately, and I know this isn't what you want, but I see no reason to change the way I voted last time, which unfortunately for you, I'm afraid, is that I'm going to uphold that previous decision to approve.
Thank you, Councillor Hartford. Councillor Hunt, and then Councillor Bradman.
Well, I had, Chair, planned to say quite a lot, but I think Councillor Hartford has put it, not only covered everything I would have said, but also I find myself in complete agreement with her. And I also find it in the attitude of courage. And I think it does take probably more courage to go against a large group of objectors than to go along with them. And so I must agree, and also in coming to my decision on this, like Councillor Hartford, I haven't really looked at the tenancy of a caravan park. There may be extra things about the longevity of that park and the legality of it, but nevertheless, in terms of coming to my decision, I haven't thought about that. I've thought about them, as someone said, as people. So I would agree with Councillor Hartford.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Bradman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a lot of sympathy with the objectors here present, and I do understand where you're coming from. Sorry, right. I was saying I have a lot of sympathy with the people who have come to express their views locally, but as in our first consideration of this, I, like Councillor Hartford, can find no reason to refuse it. However, what I would like, and I can't remember if we put this into the previous decision, I would like to suggest that there is the Woodfords are required to attend and be part of a liaison committee, so that they have regular consultations with you, so that you have a regular and formalised forum in which you can raise your concerns with them, so that that is mediated by the County Council perhaps, and so that you have a formal, proper way to raise your concerns on a regular basis with them as operators. That will then give you the strength to inform and involve the Environment Agency in that. I say that because locally I have had extremely powerful help from the Environment Agency. It's dealt with a situation near me, and we have been served extremely well by them. I know not all Environment Agency officers are as vigilant as the one we were fortunate enough to be served by. But in this case, this is the very best way that you can get them to be involved in this, in monitoring the site. If you are regularly raising concerns, it's minuted, it's put up on their and your parish website. They then have to respond to your concerns. You have a forum in which members of the public can report. And I think that's probably at least one way that you can keep your concerns to ensure that they are being taken into account properly and in a timely fashion by the Environment Agency.
Thank you, Councillor Bradman. I think Ms Fitch would like to reply to that. Thank you.
Yeah, just to confirm, in the minutes last time, when it goes into what was agreed, it does say, with the inclusion of a condition for liaison group to be formed, and the applicants submit a scheme of how that liaison group would be implemented. So that can be carried forward.
That's super then, isn't it? So, Councillor Batchelor.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, as was mentioned before, we're here to decide upon the noise and the water vapour. Those are the two issues that we're, as a committee, being asked to decide upon today. I agree with Councillor Howell. I think it would have been better for us as a committee if we did have an expert officer here in the water vapour that we could ask technical questions to and receive technical responses, and the same for the members of the public here as well. I mean, I, for one, see the officers' reports and recommendations have indicated that the proposals by the applicant to ameliorate the noise and water vapour are acceptable. And I, for one, I'd be very wary to second-guess the officers and the technical advice that we have in the papers here. So at this stage in the debate, Chairman, I'm minded to vote in favour of the proposals.
Thank you, Councillor Batchelor. Councillor Whitehead? Lovely, thank you.
I voted against this proposal last time on the grounds that I felt it was not sufficiently moving the wood up the waste hierarchy. And that was the thing that I took into consideration, and that was all I did. If I were asked about my view on the 2 points we've got here today, then I would not be objecting to the proposal. We have got the experts' view in our papers. I think, as other councillors have said, we have to take that from the experts. We've had, claims from the objectors, which I can only say on the basis of what we got here are greatly exaggerated. And therefore, as far as the water vapour is concerned, I can see no grounds to refuse the application on that. The other issue that we've heard a lot about is the caravan site. According to the district councillor there, the licence is only for caravans between March and October. So there should be no caravans on that site if it was operating within its planning permission. And I am not sure, and in fact I'm unclear as to whether we can take into account the illegal operation of a caravan site. In effect, those people there are squatters. That the caravan site should not be operating. They should not be there. And therefore, I find it very difficult to say we should take that, we should, ignore the fact that it's illegal, ignore the fact that they shouldn't be there, and, look at the noise in relation to the occupation of that caravan site. I find that very difficult. I mean, I really don't see that it's something that we can take into account. Therefore, I'm in a rather peculiar position, having voted against this in the first place, but for reasons we are not considering today, I'm being asked to vote again on what I would do. If I were to vote on the two things that are here, then I would have to vote in favour. But given that I was against the scheme on other grounds, I think I'll just abstain on this occasion.
Of course, that's within your rights, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Hudson.
Is there?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to say very little because my copious notes have been stolen by Councillor Batchelor, word for word. Thank you. And also Councillor Harford, word for word. So I'm not going to go on about that, but I will say just one thing, and that's to our friend, our county councillor over there, how well he's represented his parishioners and how very look at the art to have him. You spoke very well, my friend. However, as Councillor Harford and Councillor Batchelor and my other colleagues have said, I'm minded to keep this as it is. Thank you.
Okay. I'll take Councillor Howell. Councillor Howell, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. I have spoken a bit today. I don't find this an acceptable use of land. I do not think that this has been, to me, been clarified in a manner which I'm happy with, and therefore on this particular and the geographical nature, which is very well explained to me, I do not feel comfortable in voting this, and therefore I will be voting against this application.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. Councillor Hartford, would you like another go?
I'm really sorry. Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I just wanted to say, in case it gives my colleague, Councillor Whitehead, some comfort, this isn't about whether people are there temporarily, permanently, legally or illegally. It's about the protection of people at whatever point they are there. And to go back to what I said at the beginning, our decision is to look at appropriate land use, knowing that we are reassured that the appropriate expert protections are in place. And so I do hope that that gives you some comfort that the appropriate safety measures that are in place through those expert agencies will see that regardless of how much time those people spend on that site, they are protected.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Hartford. So, right. Members, has anybody got any more comments? Can I confirm? If not, can I confirm that we have concluded the debate? I can see no other arms moving. So, do we have a proposal then? Councillor Hudson.
I'd like to propose we accept the recommendation from the officers and uphold the decision made at the last meeting.
So Councillor Hudson has made a proposal. We go for officers' recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hunt. Councillor Hunt is seconding Councillor Hudson's. So all those in favour of going with officer recommendation, please show a hands and put it up high. Okay, so against and any abstentions? Thank you. So this application has been approved. So we'll have a 15-minute break. Well, I don't know. No, because some. What? Okay. Well, council. Okay, so you'll take over Councillor Hartford's going to take over Council. So you sort it out with Councillor Hudson.
So if you just let them know we come back at 2 p.m. We're adjourning and we're coming back.
So before we go, we're going to come back. Everybody's connected with the next application on the planning at 2 o'clock. Super, thank you. And thank you, members.